Zohar asked me to talk about the issue of corporate pyramids, the problems involved in the policies that have been chosen. So I'll briefly review what the Committee on Enhancing Competitiveness, sometimes called also the Concentration Committee, what it did. And in particular, I'll talk about what are the problems that the Israeli pyramids pose, why taking a structural approach might be appropriate in this case, and the particular design of the chosen structural remedies. So a few words of background. This is a slide that shows the average pyramidal level around the world in different countries. And as you can see, Israel is the second highest. It's only behind Colombia, and it's closely followed by Sri Lanka. Everybody else from Chile forward is much behind. So the complexity and depth of Israeli pyramids is quite stands out compared to countries, to advanced economies, which Israel likes to see itself as being a member of. If you look at the countries here, you'll see that most of the advanced economies, both those that have large economies and small economies like Denmark, would have very low pyramidal levels. Related, Israel has very high levels of private benefits of control when those are measured using the standard proxy of looking at control premia, which financial economists believe that once you take into account post-acquisition reactions, you can get a very good proxy for the private benefits of control that flow directly to the controller. And again, you see that Israel stands at a very high level, and that advanced economies have private benefits that are of a different order of magnitude. What are the agency problems of pyramids? The literature in financial economists views financial pyramids as combining two problems which together create a difficult agency situation. One is that you have someone that has a lock on control. Control is in their hands by virtue of their control of enough voting rights, which means that the market for corporate control, by definition, does not provide a source of discipline. Now, this is the case also when you have a controlling shareholder without a pyramid. However, when you have a controlling shareholder without a pyramid, you don't have the market for corporate control, but when somebody has, say, 50% or 60% or 70% of the cash flow rights, they have strong financial incentives to do the right thing, and they don't have much incentive to take inefficient actions at the expense of the minority. However, in a pyramid, the lock on control is combined with the fact that you have very substantial separation of cash flow rights and voting rights. So someone might have a lock on control, but at the same time have only a limited fraction of the cash flow rights, say 10 or 20 or 25%, which means that they have distorted incentives. They have significantly distorted incentives to engage in things even in a static fashion. But I think that for our purposes here, it's important to stress two types of decisions for which they have distorted incentives. One is decisions whether to expand the corporate pyramid, let's say by adding an additional layer. So financial economists have long recognized that someone who controls a pyramid would have an incentive to add an additional layer, even when such an expansion would be inefficient. Just to look at a simple example, if private benefits of control are 10%, and the controller has 25% of the cash flow rights, and therefore bears 25% of the consequences for equity capital, then if they can add a layer and have another 100 assets, assets with a value of 100 under their control, it would be in their private interest to do it, even if this expansion would increase the combined value, the aggregate value of cash flow rights by 15, so it's inefficient. And the reason is,
would reduce.
Yes.
If it would reduce.
Even if it would reduce, yes. Always follow the slides, not the speakers. So, and the reason is that this is an inefficient transaction. However, from the private perspective of the controller, they are going to get to see their private benefits of control enhanced by 10 because they are going to get 10% out of the 100, but they are going to bear only 25% of the 15, which is 3.75. So from their perspective, even though this is clearly inefficient, this would be in their interest. The second problem, which has a similar analytical structure, is what we may call the persistence problem. So a controller that at some point in time is no longer efficiently holding a layer, maybe because they cannot manage deep down the corporate ladder, or because they are no longer the efficient manager period, they would have an incentive to keep that layer even if this is no longer efficient. Consider the same pyramid, and let's suppose that we come to a point in time in which the efficient thing is to take a layer worth 100, to sell it for 120, because somebody can manage those assets more efficiently, and then to distribute the 120 among all the shareholders. So thereby eliminating this layer of the corporate pyramid. Even though this would produce an increase in value of 20%, the controller would not find it in their private interest, and the reason is, from their perspective, right now, they are getting 10% of the 100, that's 10. They are getting 25% of the 90, it's another 22.5. If they sell, so right now they are getting a disproportionate fraction of the pie. If they sell that layer and distribute and dismantle that layer, they would get just 25% of 120, which is only 30, and therefore they wouldn't do it. Okay, now when you look at a problem like corporate pyramids, or in general a corporate governance issue, many people, including many in this room, their initial inclination would be to say, let's try to accept the structure for now as given, and let's try to improve the internal governance processes. Let's have certain procedures. In the case of the corporate pyramid, the committee concluded, after a long consideration, that it would make sense not just to try to improve the internal governance processes, but taking as given the structures, but to try to influence the structures in place. And some of the factors that played a role are the fact that Israel is such a world leader in pyramidal layering, also a world leader in control premium, and that when you have elaborate pyramids and when you have very large control premia, then, as we just saw, pyramidal structures have the tendency to expand, or at least to persist, even when they are no longer efficient for the economy or for their investors. How does one go about designing a structure intervention? The committee was, for a significant period of time, kind of exploring the idea of structural intervention, but it it put on the table in its interim report a different structural remedy than the remedy in the final report. In the interim report, the idea was to try to put forward some sort of a market-based mechanism, quote unquote, that what it would do is would try to have a screen. So it would allow a pyramid that happens to be efficient to persist, but would enable minority shareholders, public investors who are right now stuck in a pyramid that might no longer be efficient, it would enable them to have some sort of a mechanism that would lead such a structure to change. So given this, I, at the time, kind of developed for the committee a mechanism that tried to fit this goal of coming up with a market-based mechanism. And this is not, so for the practically minded people, this is not that important because it's no longer part of what's going to happen. For the academics here, I think it's of interest, and I would be happy to discuss it. And I'm currently kind of writing it up as an academic paper. So the idea behind the mechanism is the following, that if you have a pyramidal company, and the question is, do we apply it to all companies or not, but let's put it aside. If somebody from the outside comes and puts an offer to buy all the shares at a sufficient premium over the transaction price. For concreteness, let's say it's 20%. Then there are two options. The controller can go to the public investors and convince them that this is not worthwhile because this is an opportunistic bid, the price is going to come up soon and so forth, and it's better to reject. However, if the minority shareholders vote in favor of accepting the offer, then the controller, if the controller doesn't want to go along with the offer, has to make an offer to buy the minority shares at the price of the outside offer or at a somewhat reduced price. The idea behind this mechanism was that if you have a company that exists in a pyramidal structure but it's inefficient either because of the diversion of private benefits of control or because of general underperformance, then someone would have an incentive to come and make an offer at closer to the efficient full value. And that would, by the way the mechanism is designed, wouldn't necessarily force the controlling shareholder to give up their control, but if they want to retain their control, but if they want to retain their control, they have to let the minority shareholders out at a price that reflects their claim on the value there. Now, so this remedy was in the interim report in between, even though in some ways this remedy is not as strong as the remedy I'll come to presently. People in the market were expressing concerns about it being complicated, novel, requiring regulatory supervision and so forth. And then the final approach the committee put forward, again, takes the structural view that one shouldn't just accept the structure in place as given, but try to shape them. And what the committee did, and as you know, as Zohar mentioned, the government yesterday approved, was to have a remedy that places a limit on the number of pyramidal layers that you can have in a public structure, no more than 2 for for new structures, grandfathering up to 3 for existing structures. Compared to the remedy I mentioned before, this one, because it's a regulatory fiat, it doesn't allow for the possibility that many on the committee viewed as sufficiently small in likelihood that you might have a many-layer pyramid that is efficient. However, some of the reasons that went into choosing this simple remedy are the following. One is that this idea of a multi-layered pyramid that is nonetheless efficient, this is something that in the literature is viewed as especially relevant for developing economies, where it might be important to have a very elaborate, complicated group, because it's very difficult to have efficient, effective, reliable contracting with companies outside your business group. And therefore, it's important to have elaborate business groups. And Israel is widely viewed as no longer being at this stage. By the way, as you saw, almost all the countries that have those deep pyramids are countries that belong to the developing world, and where this efficiency logic for the need for an elaborate pyramid might be relevant. Second, Israel already has a certain mandatory limitation on corporate structures. It has long had a requirement of 1 share, 1 vote. And in a way, what corporate pyramids do is enable controllers to get around that 1 share, 1 vote requirement. What the remedy does is it doesn't eliminate deviations from 1 share, 1 vote completely. However, it limits their practical significance. If you have 2 layers, the lowest you can go and still, in terms of your cash flows, and still control a company in the second layer would be 25%, 50% at each of the levels. Okay, let me stop here and open it up for discussion.